It is amazing to be here. I heard the word stoked, and I am stoked. This is a fantastic crowd, just looking out at all of you. And to think we're at the largest AI conference in India. I mean, look to the left, look to the right. This is the brain power here sitting among us. Take it in for a minute. Okay, so it's morning. I heard some people may have had a late night last night. I was on a flight coming in from Dubai, so I missed all the fun. But what I'm going to ask you to do is to stand up just for a minute. Humor me. And stand up out of your seats. Let's get energized together. Okay. What I really want to do is level set where are we in this conversation. So first, it's okay to be honest. If you're a little skeptical, if you're not sure that we're going to deliver the outcomes from generative AI, it's okay, you can sit down. No one will judge you, you can have a seat right now. Oh, there's a lot of enthusiasm in this room, I see it. Oh, we had one person sit down, okay, lots of enthusiasm, maybe he just got tired. Okay, second, how about if you believe in the next 12 months, more than half of the companies that you interact with will have generative AI use cases in production. Stay standing. If you don't think 12 months is enough time, sit down. Okay. A little bit of realism coming into the conversation. You know, there's some big rocks we'll talk about today and through the sessions. How about if you individually or your company are directly involved right now in a use case that is in production, not piloting, not POC, in production, stay standing. Everybody else, please sit down. Okay, so what this tells you is look around the room quickly, and these are the people you should talk to today. Okay. Great. Thank you so much. So I think it's a good place to start because with all of the enthusiasm and optimism, today, throughout the day, we'll talk about a lot of the big rocks that we still need to solve. And it's important that with all of the opportunity, we also balance that with all of the risks. But I'm going to start on an optimistic note, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why would we title a slide, "The Sparks That Fire Mind-Blowing Creativity." What does fire and generative AI have to do with each other? In my mind, if we go back millions of years ago, humans, society changed with the introduction, the invention of fire. At the time, they probably didn't understand what sort of an impact it would have on them. And it wasn't just light and heat. One of the things that anthropologists have talked about is that it changed how they ate. They started to cook. It meant they had to spend less time hunting. It created capacity. Some have said maybe it changed their anatomy and caused their brain to change and grow. But the most important thing to take away is that it gave them the space and the capacity for innovation, to push society forward, not incrementally, but in leaps. And I would argue that generative AI is our moment of fire, our moment to change and transform how businesses run and to change society. And you might say, hey, Katie, AI has been around for decades. Why are you so optimistic right now? And I would say, I think there's something very different that came about with ChatGPT in that it really and truly democratized, it consumerized AI. It has changed how the average person thinks about AI, talks about AI, reads about AI, and their willingness to engage through new channels. And so I think that's the pivotal shift that we're seeing. Now, we all know the statistics. Within a couple days, 100 million users were using ChatGPT. They were writing poems. They were crafting letters. My brother-in-law was drafting real estate announcements. That started to level off. And what we're seeing now is that in queries and searches, it's more CIOs, CTOs, CDOs, probably many of you who are grappling with the realities of security, privacy, IP. How do we think about the different language models? And so we're in that hard phase of development, but I would say we have to remain euphoric about that this is the moment to be in this industry, in this space, working on this topic, because it is truly a moment where we can transform and leap ahead. Something very cautionary, though, here. As I travel around and I talk to clients and I talk to various industry experts, I hear a lot about productivity. And I will say the hyper-focus on productivity is dangerous. The hyper-focus on productivity is limiting. the hyper-focus on productivity will leave AI in the same space that so much digital transformation has fallen, which is slight optimization at best in enterprises, where we don't stop, we don't think end-to-end, we don't think about transformational outcomes, and as a result, we optimize functions, we put in point solutions, we look at it as technology only. To me, we have to step back and reimagine the kinds of outcomes, the kinds of economic value this can create for us, the kinds of speed to outcome it can create for us, maybe even completely different models of collaboration that allow us to innovate differently in the ecosystem. So when we step back as Genpact and think about, at this stage of development, not 3 years from now, at this stage of development, how do we reimagine outcomes? I'm just going to give you 2 simple use cases that we've been working on with our clients to bring that to life. And again, productivity, ways of working is part of every use case. That's how we operationalize things. But how we think about solving bigger problems than that. So the first is, if any of you are in at a financial institution, you'll understand just how arduous financial crimes are and just how significant they are. For a bank, for a cryptocurrency firm, trillions of dollars move through the system that are illegal or illicit. And a very small percentage of those are actually caught, in the monitoring process. It's broken. Financial institutions spend billions of dollars between operations and fines to solve this. And today it's a very human process with some automation that leaves lots of room for human judgment and error. So what we've built using our risk canvas on top of Amazon Bedrock is a use case whereby, imagine you're the analyst. What did you do yesterday? Before this invention, you sat there through an automated feed, you received the transaction level data, and a transaction was flagged. You don't actually know why it was flagged. The first thing that you do is you have to look at the words in that transaction and try and match them to the 2,700 suspect words that have been characterized in this cryptocurrency firm. So the transaction that comes across is Katie Stein went to Burger King. She used her crypto wallet. I don't know why I use my crypto, but she used her crypto wallet and she did a transaction and it's been flagged. Is that suspicious or not? So there they sit and they look up burger, they look up king, they go through all the matching, but the suspicious word is urge. In burger, there's urge. And urge is a suspicious word in the 2,700 words. This used to take 7 days, maybe 10 days for a transaction to go from being flagged through to when someone could process, go through all the derivatives and find it. What's the outcome we're trying to move towards? We're trying to move towards more accuracy, and we're trying to move towards speed. Velocity is critical here. So we've used generative AI and large language models to go ahead and auto-match and look for all the permutations so that we can spit those up quickly. Then we've used generative AI to create the narrative, the suspicious activity report, so that we can understand why and have full transparency. And now the analyst hasn't been displaced. The analyst's role is to actually look at that with judgment. And now they can look at more of those, and hopefully we can find more suspicious activity and flag it earlier in the process for remediation. So that's just an example about how in a space like financial crimes that impacts all of us, but certainly impacts our financial systems, generative AI is being used today to actually add to and enhance the security that we can deliver. Another use case is oftentimes, again, when we think about productivity, we think about cost. We think about streamlining and automating. That's what we've been taught through digitization. But when I think about this next use case, we're working with one of the largest digital platforms, and what we're doing with them is we're thinking about their small, medium business ad sales. So imagine a scenario where, what's the coffee shop in Bangalore? Is it Third Wave that people like to go to? You're an operator of Third Wave, and you get a text that asks you about your footfall traffic. And you're coming into maybe a seasonal time, you're gonna have a seasonal promotion, and you're thinking about it, and footfall's been a little weak recently. You're not sure why, but it's been a little weak. And so you're interacting with the chat, and you're providing information. And you're concerned because you're seeing some slowdown. Maybe people seem to be coming in less often. And so it's piqued your interest and some information's been gathered. Later that morning, an analyst sits down and they look at their queue of calls to make. And through integrating using generative AI, CRM, and data that was collected and inputted by you, your business has been prioritized to the top of that queue. Not only prioritized, but actually a personalized approach has been generated. And through the CRM, previous information about your ad buys and how they've performed, as well as external information around where you're located, what might be going on, have been generated and synthesized into a recommendation. Imagine sitting there as the analyst with all of this information at your hands in order to have a personalized conversation. I mean, think about win more, grow more, keep more. This is the synthesis of it. So the analyst calls you. You usually get these telemarketer calls. You don't want to pick them up. But because this chat's happened earlier, you pick it up and you have a conversation. The analyst explains to you that with your seasonal promotion coming up, that's great. But you've typically been buying ads on a weekend evening as if it's sort of an occasional visit to the coffee store. And people are back in the office. And the best time to place ads would be digitally. If you were to place them right after lunch when people are getting tired, now that they're in the office in your location. So you switch your strategy, you buy the ads, you move on. For us as a company, this is critical because we're shifting the paradigm from how can we do calls cheaper to how can we help our clients grow more. And that changes everything in our industry. It shifts from a person-based costing model to outcomes that we can generate alongside our clients using generative AI. That's transformative for us and our clients. But a lot of you had some skepticism around 12 months, and certainly many people are not yet in production. So the cautionary tale is 60% of AI projects over time, research would say, have failed. And I think for people in the room like you, the question is, what is your role in helping organizations change their mindset? Today, a number of organizations are still really in the first act of what I'll call a multi-act play. I don't think we even really know the ending, but in the first act, it's a lot of experimentation, a lot of grappling with learning. And metrics show us that nearly half of companies are still in that first act. To me, that's a profoundly confusing statement, which is, how can we still be caught in the first act? Now, since July, a number of companies have moved into the second act. What happens in the second act? Companies start to talk about responsible AI. They start to prioritize their use cases. They start to think about the costing and the business value, and they start to think about the operating model. It's a new operating model to enable this. But it's still a small percentage that have moved there, and I think many of you have the voice in your companies or in your services to help your clients actually now shift into the second act and start to prepare. But that requires that in your individual capacity, you bring the different functions together. You challenge questions around whether the responsible AI frameworks that you've had in the past are actually applicable for generative AI. Are the guardrails enough? You start to challenge where the accountability resides, and you work together with your legal and your tech teams to overcome challenges that are blockers if we use historical policies. I mean, why is it if we're worried about permissive licenses? Fine, so let's think about watermarks. How do we help the organization think differently? And very much that's the role of you as leaders in this room. So as leaders, I have 3 tenets that I would like you or urge you to really focus on if we want to go into Act 2 and then accelerate beyond that to Act 3. Very simply put, it's the where, it's the who, and it's the how. So what I mean by the where is, how do we help organizations both prioritize for the short term, to sustain and learn, and prioritize for the long term to transform. It's the who, which is at the center of this, is a significant amount of change management. It's senior stakeholders and thinking horizontally end to end about business transformation. It's operators and users and thinking about how their role evolves and the skills that they'll need for the future. And it's the how with respect to responsible AI, which I think is only going to increase in terms of a conversation that the entire value chain needs to struggle with. This is not something just for the companies that are building foundational models. Responsible AI has to originate within corporates as well, and has to be core to the values and the culture around adopting an AI-first strategy. So, as our Chief Strategy Officer, prioritization is key to everything I do. And I've been watching over the last 6 months as we've seen 1,000 flowers bloom. And I understand that early in the cycle, that sort of hyper-innovation and ideation is necessary. But I think we're seeing a lot of fatigue with that now. and organizations are trying to grapple with how do you prioritize, where do you prioritize, what are the criteria. For Genpact, our strategy team chose to prioritize as a service firm around opportunity, so where we see the greatest outcomes for our clients, and risk or challenges to get to production. And we went through that, and then within use cases, prioritize where would we start. It's not enough to say, everyone's saying sales and marketing, the contact center. Okay, where within that will clients have the greatest comfort level to allow generative AI to function? In many cases, not initially with their end customer, oftentimes internally supporting their colleagues who are at the contact center. So how do we get a use case and break it down and start to think about it and how it integrates into the tech stack and the end-to-end process? For many of you who may work at companies or at startups it may be about how do you find that use case where you can get to first economic value. But for companies, I would urge, it's really thinking about a short and medium-term horizon. And the short term has to be pragmatic around use cases that have economic value that you can get to within the risk parameters that can be comfortable for your company. And I would say, based on what we're seeing, security is one of the biggest concerns. So let's tackle that. Let's figure out how we can prioritize a set of use cases and ways to approach those use cases that allow us to comfort our colleagues so we can innovate and experiment together. So with that, Genpact started thinking about how could we do that with our clients. And later on today, you'll hear more about tiny language models, which sounds a little bit like a paradox. Everyone's talking about large language models, and I'm talking here about tiny language models. But really, the concept is around how can we get to the same mighty impact that a large language model has while limiting the data and putting it into our clients' environments so that we can manage security and manage how the data is working to have the right effectiveness of the model and its outcomes. So still the same power, but in production at a lower cost in production, and with more contained data around a specific use case as opposed to these big horizontal large language models. With that, I wanted to have a little bit of fun and introduce you to my buddy who's called Amusement Buddy, which is a tiny language model. And Amusement Buddy will take a moment to explain exactly what I mean.
Welcome to the demonstration of Amusement Buddy, a powerful chatbot powered by Genpact's custom tiny language model, designed to enhance visitor experiences at amusement parks and streamline operations. These parks face challenges in providing timely information and personalized experiences to their visitors, as staff often spend considerable time addressing repetitive inquiries. To address this challenge, Genpact developed Amusement Buddy, an AI-driven solution that streamlines the communication process. The Amusement Buddy chatbot was developed through data pipeline development, hyperparameter tuning, and training the tiny language model using GPT-2 architecture. This ensures its adaptability to a wide range of applications. Unlike typical chatbots that rely on predefined responses and limited understanding of context, Amusement Buddy is a TLM-based chatbot trained on historical data. This enables it to provide more accurate, context-aware, and natural responses, ensuring a better user experience and more effective communication. Let's see Amusement Buddy in action. Meet John, a visitor at an amusement park. Every chat message goes to TLM, and response is generated by a language models which is tiny in size. Big difference between chatbot and TLM is, scenario is not predefined in TLM. Response is generated dynamically by TLM.
Hi, Amusement Buddy.
Hello, John. Welcome to the amusement park. How can I help you today?
Can you tell me the wait time for the roller coaster?
The current wait time for the roller coaster is approximately 15 minutes.
What other attractions are near the roller coaster?
Near the roller coaster, you can find the Ferris wheel, the bumper cars, and the haunted house.
Which restaurant in the park offers vegetarian options?
The Green Garden restaurant offers a variety of vegetarian dishes, including salads, sandwiches, and pasta.
I heard there's a special event happening today. Can you tell me more about it?
Yes, there's a live music concert at the park's main stage from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. today, featuring popular local bands.
What time does the park close?
The amusement park closes at 10 p.m. tonight.
Great, thanks. Can I get a map of the park?
Of course. Here's a map of the park to help you navigate and enjoy your day.
The Amusement Buddy chatbot provides numerous benefits, such as time saving, enhanced comprehension, personalized experiences, cost effectiveness, a competitive advantage, and customization and scalability. By implementing this chatbot, amusement parks can improve customer satisfaction and streamline their operations. Thank you for watching the demonstration of Amusement Buddy, powered by Genpact's custom tiny language model. Discover how this innovative TLM-based chatbot can transform your amusement park experience today.
Great, so that was just a quick preview into one of our tiny language models. Again, there'll be a session later on today, I think, that'll address them in more depth. But to me, the tiny language models are just an example of where we can be innovating with our clients in this moment where there still is uncertainty, to think about how can we create safe environments where they can move from experimentation into implementation and drive towards outcomes here. I mean, clearly as a park visitor, higher NPS or experience from being able to optimize my visit, get the most out of it, and really transitioning from linear chatbots that would have given me one response to semantic searches that helped me optimize that experience. So very excited about those. The second point I said was the who. The who is extremely important. And we didn't have many skeptics in the room at the beginning when I asked you to sit down, but there are many skeptics. And many CEOs, I read an article the other day, have a bit of FOMO. You know, every board, every C-suite is talking about generative AI. But candidly, some want to jump in and have a path and a plan, and many actually wish they could stand on the sidelines. So this is a moment when solving for the change management around this, solving the culture of an AI-first culture becomes very critical if we want to see this journey progress to the type of transformation I talked about. So where does change start? Change obviously starts with leadership, and it starts with how we talk about AI-first organizations, how we start to work as leadership teams in a horizontal structure to reimagine our businesses. But change is equally as important, we know, in the fuzzy middle. What's the fuzzy middle? The fuzzy middle is that part of the organization we all know where things get stuck. Everyone at the top talks about transformation, but somewhere, someone figures out that transformation is scary. It means risk for their job. It means things will change. Maybe their job is irrelevant. And actually, one of my biggest concerns around this conversation around productivity, which I said was dangerous, or the hyper-focus on it, is that productivity now is oftentimes being correlated or talked about with job loss. And no matter what companies are saying as they come out and say, look, if we can do our SDLC in faster cycles, we can have more developers working on more programs. To the average person, that sounds pretty terrifying. And so I think as organizations, the first thing we need to do is to stop talking about that and to start showing our intent. And what that means to me is skills and job creation. So when I think about the skills that are going to go into this next phase, it's a new set of skills. You have prompt engineers. We need more experienced designers to think about the user interfaces and experience. We need architects. We need strategists. So there's many roles that we need to create and train, and many of the very people who will be impacted directly actually are some of the best for those roles. So velocity of skilling is critical here. And associations and other groups are starting to come out with platforms. At Genpact, we have our Genome platform where we've been working on how do we skill with a target of 40,000 employees in generative AI by the end of the year. That's 40,000, and we'll actually pace probably ahead of that. And so I would urge all of you in your organizations, whether it's through external parties or through your own platforms, to think about how do you drive skilling at scale for these new roles. Those who have these new roles will win in this race, for sure. The second thing I think is with respect to data literacy. So we all talk about generative AI and models, but data literacy is equally as important. So at Genpact, we've been on a path for 3 years around skilling our entire 125,000 employees in data literacy concepts so they can understand the inputs to models. Now, this was well before generative AI, but I think it's equally as important. So I would urge all of you to be having those conversations at your leadership teams around how do you, one, show that there is more career mobility and job creation. What are those career paths? Number two, how do you think about the skilling at scale and velocity? And number three, how do we think, just like with any other invention or innovation, how do we redefine models of collaboration? We can't simply put amusement buddy into place and not teach our colleagues and our employees how to responsibly use amusement buddy, to make sure that we don't introduce bias into the system, to make sure that we are cognizant of how we're interacting with something now which will aid and augment us. The third topic I mentioned is the how. Now, we could talk about the how in terms of how do you pick which model, how do you think about your ecosystem of partners. There's many hows that need to be solved, but the how I think is most central to this discussion among leaders is around the how of responsibility. And it struck me the other day, a CEO from another firm mentioned that every time she goes and meets with an executive team, she asks, who is singularly accountable for your responsible AI strategy? And in her words, not mine, in her words, almost no one can answer her question. And I think that speaks a little bit to, there's a lot of discussion in the market, but maybe organizations haven't yet understood how fundamental this change is for them. And so at Genpact, we're working with a number of clients with our responsible AI framework, which has the foundational elements around security and privacy and data, and thinking about, how do we make sure there isn't bias in the models as we train them? How do we make sure if we're using them for HR, for recruiting, that bias doesn't creep in? How do we monitor that going onwards? The second is with respect to how we think about how responsible AI is put in place in terms of the actual strategies, the metrics, and the guardrails that we use on an ongoing basis. And then third, localization. We all know that the regulatory framework is very immature at this stage and will continue to evolve in fits and starts. And so how do we take everything we're doing at corporate centers and localize those to the local regulations? And that, as we all know, is very complex, as data regulation has been very complex before this. And so whether it's working with Genpact or working with your other providers, I think having a refreshed responsible AI strategy, a framework, and a checklist that you're working through is critical. And at the core of that has to be transparency. I mean, this is really the open source sort of revolution. So how do we make sure that we're bringing transparency, whether we're building models or whether we're implementing models or whether we're monitoring models? So I understand, I'm a pragmatist in some ways, that we're still, again, in an early inning of this. And a lot of the use cases that I see have a significant operational context to them. How do we do something we've done before at better speed, with better accuracy? But the reality is that if we really want to be in an AI-first generation, and I think that's the moment for leaders in this room to grab onto, we have to think about what has prevented AI from scaling in the past. We have a board member, Ajay Agrawal, who wrote a book, Power and Prediction, about AI, and he talks about really the difference between point solutions and system solutions. Many of even the use cases I've given today are really point solutions. They're within a function, it's to an activity, and then there's system solutions, and system solutions really reimagine end to end. If I'm applying for a mortgage, why do I have to fill out a form? Why do I have to look for a lender? How would we totally reimagine that process if it could be autonomous? That's very different from optimizing steps of the process or with automation tasks in the process, and thinking really system-wide how we would get to a very different outcome. I think it'll take time for the industry to get there. Some companies are obviously thinking far more progressively around how generative AI could disrupt them and are pushing this. I think others will continue to work through the foundation and building operational use cases. But if I think of this point solution or point technology approach versus a systems or end-to-end approach, if we really want to realize the type of value that I talked about from transformation, we'll have to get there. And I think for people in this room, or many of us, it's challenging the system. For too long, we've talked about AI embed. I would argue we need to talk about AI led. And at Genpact, that's a very active discussion, which is, how do we think AI led? How do we redefine how we imagine how work gets done, how collaboration gets done, and then use AI to lead us towards that, as opposed to simply, again, embedding it into the processes that we know. So we've talked about a couple things here, many of which will then be repeated through the course of the day in greater detail. First of all, we talked a little bit about the where. So how do we help our organizations prioritize, recognizing we're in a bimodal world of what we know and can control today and where we must go if we want to move to an AI-led world. The second is we talked a lot about culture and people and talent. And I think sometimes that's overlooked in the discussions around technology. We see so many technology programs fail because we don't understand that actually the change management is what enables a tool or technology to be its very best. We talked a bit about responsibility and how responsibility rests with many of the people in this room. It doesn't rest somewhere else with the large language model, but it rests along the entire value chain and how we can bring that into our companies and really challenge the notion that what worked before will work in the future. Because candidly, in our clients, we see that's not happening. And then I think metrics. We touched very lightly on metrics, but how do we go beyond metrics around business outcomes like growth or profitability, and how do we really think about measuring responsibility? And how do we think about putting those into our scorecards and cascading those sorts of KPIs? I spent Monday with a number of technology leaders. One of the leaders who was with me is the president of Slack. Slack is taking this very seriously because they recognize if they embed generative AI truly into their platform, and we see some of the challenges that we already see in use cases, trust will be broken. And if you don't trust in the very one tool that you should be using for knowledge and collaboration, there's a real reputational risk to that. And that is one of the things that I'll say with where we are in the maturity of generative AI today is that we should be thinking about reputational risk. And it's, again, one of the reasons we've thought about tiny large language models for now, so that we can keep pushing innovation while we work on these other topics. So if I come back then to where we started, which was fire, and I think about for a minute what I would say in conclusion to all of you, I would think that in Greek mythology, there was a Titan, and he was recognized as having brought fire and giving it to humans. He was recognized sort of as the creator of innovation, of giving this power to the human race. And we talked about what maybe that created for us in terms of a step function change in society and where we are today, and that this could be our moment again. And I think that I would argue for many of you in the room, we won't work through the granularity of these issues if you're not seeing yourself as the person bringing truly what is transformative potential. Recognizing we'll all be a little burned by fire as we go through this, but how do you help your organizations overcome these hurdles and find pragmatic solutions where we can start to move forward into Act 2 and Act 3? And then I was so happy to see so much optimism in the room at the beginning that people do believe that the outcomes will be realized, but someone said to me once, whether you're an optimist or you're a pessimist, you all die. You die the same way. It's really just how you live on the journey. And I would leave each of you with that, which is there are going to be many bumps in this road and many challenges to overcome. And I truly believe in this kind of proud community, we can work together in the ecosystem to solve them. But the most important thing is that we have the same optimism around the potential here. And that each of you recognizes that you're standing at the epicenter of truly transformation and change. And for the first time, I think, have one of the most important roles to bear in organizations and in ecosystems to drive that forward. And so I just want to thank everyone here, both for listening to me, but also for the role that I know that you'll play, because I truly believe we are at a landmark moment. And there's much to do and much to work through and resolve, but that we collectively as a community, in 5 years, we'll look back and realize that this was the watershed moment. So thank you so much, and I look forward to joining so many of the sessions today.